Hey, Malvika.
Hi, Jamal. So I'm just adding, Rola sent like an updated presentation, so I'm just adding that to our slide deck. But other than that, I think we're all fine.
Okay, awesome. Sounds good. Yeah, the mailboxes don't seem to have any emails from anyone so far, but I'll monitor them and send them the link as necessary.
Perfect. Okay, cool. And then there's a couple people waiting.
So usually, I guess after like the staff discusses what needs to be done, we'll usually just let like the speakers or moderators in to
Okay.
just check and see if that's who it is. If it's not like a speaker, then just have them wait. But if it is a speaker, we can let them in soon.
Perfect. Okay. So I let Val in, and I think Colin was here and then Colin left. So when Colin comes by, and then should I let Rula in because Rula is one of the speakers?
Yeah, in 1 second. There's like 3 SIDs. Oh,
I know.
Hello. Yes. I logged in and I saw all of our logo.
And hey Val. So
Hi.
I don't think.
Hi, Val. Sorry.
Hello.
I just haven't met her yet. Well, I met you in the interview, but like, not on a call. Sorry, Jamal, go ahead.
You're good. Val, so I think I briefly talked to you about it on Wednesday, but I'm sure you've seen Malvika's email with like the task and pretty much just take notes throughout the event. And at the end, you do a summary. And I know I haven't really walked you through it yet, but you can kind of just look on, I'll actually send you something right now so you can kind of see like what to kind of take notes on and how the format will look so you have a better idea of it. Just so we're not just, giving you random take notes and do a summary. So I'll kind of show you how it's been done in the past right now. And I'll send it to you so you can kind of go into it knowing what to do. But that's all you really have to do today.
Cool.
Okay, and then this is being recorded, which I didn't realize that it was going to record everything. But you can splice it because I did like the, start recording when the thing starts. I was like, oh, I didn't get started recorded, but all right. Okay, I'm gonna let Kara in.
Yeah, Malvika, you can also I think you can pause the recording and just start it once it's 9 p.m. But you just have to remember to resume.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. Good morning to those of you who are in morning, afternoon, and evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us for this event. As you're coming in, please feel free to write in the chat your name and where you're coming from so that we can get a sense of our audience. And also as the speakers are talking, you can feel free to use the chat to add in questions and comments as they come up. So my name is Kara McBride. I am a senior education specialist at World Learning, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Education for Development Workgroup. And this is the work group that has organized today's event. Those of us who are in education know that a lot of learning has to do with being able to take a skill and knowledge and expand it to more and more contexts. And as somebody who comes primarily from the language field, I've been very excited to be learning as much as I have from my colleagues who are in math, who have been using SEL and UDL in amazing ways to support the learning and well-being of students and teachers around the world. So I'm not sure if our other co-chair is with us. Yes, Alisa. If you could say hello to the audience for a moment.
Hello, thank you, Kara. Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Alisa Phillips. I'm the other co-chair, and just saying good morning to you, and thank you so much for coming. We hope that this will be a very exciting discussion, and welcome. Thanks, everybody.
Great, thank you. So to kick us off, we'll now turn things over to Dr. Colin Ackerman. He is a research associate at the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, or CASEL, as so many of us know it. And then he'll be telling you more about the event and introducing the other speakers. So take it away, Colin.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kara, and hi, everyone. So like Kara just said, my name is Colin Ackerman, a research associate at CASEL, which I'll say it one more time if you've never heard of us. It's the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. And a key to sort of that name, just that kind of frames this conversation, is originally it was called the Center for the Advancement of Social Emotional Learning. And a number of years ago, they changed the name to Academic and Social Emotional Learning to really emphasize the integrated nature of SEL, which is a theme that I think is going to come up a lot in today's conversations. I'm a former teacher. I used to teach elementary in Tennessee, and a general teaching and pedagogy sort of nerd. So I was thrilled when I was asked to participate in this amazing panel. So first, I wanted to talk briefly about the work we do at CASEL and connect it a little bit to the projects that you're all going to hear about today. So at CASEL, we understand social emotional learning as a process through which young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage their emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. And a key part of that definition is that it's young people and adults. The co-learning is really important in that SEL process. And additionally, CASEL's SEL framework is driven by a theory of action that posits there's 4 key elements that guide successful and sustainable SEL implementation. Purposely building foundational support and planning for that system of SEL, strengthening adult SEL competencies and capacities, promoting SEL explicitly with students, and arguably the most critical that drives it forward is using data and reflecting on data for continuous improvement. So I specifically became involved with this panel because some of the work I did at CASEL exploring and understanding how to integrate SEL into the elementary math setting. I worked with a group of teachers in Minneapolis, Minnesota here in the States to sort of explore that question. What does math look like? What does SEL look like rather during math instruction? And I'd say our biggest learning with that project was the importance of understanding that SEL is already happening in classrooms, math or otherwise. Even if you've never heard of the concept of social emotional learning or universal design for learning, if you're a quality teacher, there's already some level of that already happening, whether it's self-managing your volume in a math class during independent work or collaborating with a classmate on a set of problems. Opportunities to practice SEL are always present. So the task for the teacher becomes making these implicit opportunities more explicit. And while my and CASEL's work has been based in the United States exclusively, as I learned more about these amazing panelists that you'll be hearing from today, I really discovered and got kind of excited about many of the high-level learnings about social emotional learning and universal design for learning during math in these international contexts run very parallel to the work that CASEL does. In a lot of the language we're using, a lot of the sort of concepts of integrating it throughout the day, making the implicit explicit, the importance of adult learning in particular are all critical parts in all of these projects. So the logic of building SEL systems that are responsive to the context in which they live is one way, especially that SEL and universal design for learning are increasingly being seen as complementary. So as opposed to this separate thing, SEL or UDL is a separate concept coming into the classroom, something that all of these panelists share that I'm really excited about is that it's really something that needs to kind of live and breathe systemically throughout the classroom, throughout the school. Additionally, the key role of adult learning in the process of SEL has emerged as a key driver for success. Adults have to have meaningful opportunities to learn and develop their own SEL skills if they hope to impart the same lessons on their students. I always like to joke that I learned how to empathize with others like 5 years ago. So like we can't always assume that all adults are these fully formed emotional beings ready to just kind of impart that on students. We all have to do work, and that's the importance of that co-learning, as I emphasized earlier. So for this panel, which as I've said a number of times, I'm so excited to hear about, we have representatives from 3 incredible projects exploring SEL and UDL in geographically and diverse contexts. So first, Haley Nyad from Inclusive Development Partners, along with Winifred Kokor Okansi, a classroom teacher from Edo West District in Ghana, will talk about their work using universal design for learning in first grade classrooms. After that, Doreen Kalustian and Rula Bayram from World Learning will discuss integrating SEL into math in Lebanon for grades 1 through 6. They've done some really great work and have some really interesting findings. And then finally, Fernanda Soares from FHI 360 will share her work about supporting SEL development in pre-service math teachers in Guatemala. So after all the speakers have presented, we'll have the rest of our time for questions and discussion. As we're going, as Kara mentioned before, if you have a question, particularly relating specifically to one of the projects you're hearing, please type them in the chat as we go. We'll be banking all those questions so that at the Q&A, we'll be able to come back to as many of those specific questions as we can, as well as have some discussion of some high-level concepts and commonalities between the projects. So what we're going to hope to talk about is, where and when during math class are there opportunities to implicitly practice SEL? How, integrating SEL and UDL during the instructional day. And a question I'm really interested in is, that I'm going to have the panelists talk about is how you would frame SEL and UDL to convince a skeptical stakeholder of its importance. If there's someone who doesn't think it's important, what's the messaging? How do you kind of talk about and sell the importance of it? As well as any questions, as I said, you all have about the specific presentations from the panelists. So thank you all very much for coming, and I'm going to turn it over to our first presentation of Haley and Winifred to talk about their work in Ghana.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks, Colin. Good morning and good afternoon from wherever you are. My name is Haley Nyad, and I work at Inclusive Development Partners. Joined with me today is my colleague, Winifred, and I will just quickly turn it over to her to hear about all the great work she's doing. But just as an introduction, IDP has been working in Ghana since 2019 to pilot a universal design for learning approach in early grade literacy and numeracy instruction. The objective of this activity was to make early grade instruction more inclusive of learners with diverse needs, whether those are learners with disabilities or learners with other support needs besides disability. Winifred, who we'll hear from now, has been working in schools for over 10 years, and she currently teaches a grade 1 class with 87 learners. And she will tell us more about the specific strategies that she uses in her own teaching to support UDL implementation in numeracy instruction. So over to Winifred's presentation, which is a video recording. I don't know if others are hearing the sound. I'm not.
No. There's no sound.
Malalika, make sure when you're on your screen share that there's a box that's share computer sound. Make sure that's clicked. If you click, if you want to unshare your screen and reshare it, there's a box at the bottom that says share sound, my computer sound.
We're still not hearing the sound.
Do you want me to try to share my screen to see if that helps?
Yes, that would be great because I did click the sound sharing option and I don't know why it's not working.
All right, if you want to let me share my screen, that'll be fine. Thanks. Let me know if you can hear me when I play it.
Hello. Please,
do you hear that?
A teacher from
Yes.
Please, I would like to talk about some UDL strategies that I use in my lesson delivery. Okay, first of all, we have what we call multiple means of engagement. With multiple means of engagement, we have so many aspects under it. And one of them is greeting. Greeting, learners greet each other early in the morning when we get to the class to know how each other is faring. Then just after that, we do what we call revision of previous lessons. So the learners, we use something called bingo game, and that one, it comes in a circle form. So learners and then the teacher will be in a circle with a goal. And the learners with their teacher sing songs and then go around. So the teacher will throw the ball to a learner, and then the rest of the learners stop. And then the person tells what he or she learned from the previous day. And then we do it like 3, 4, and then we move on because of the number of learners in the class. Then just after that, learners sit down and then we go through the visual schedule. The visual schedule, what it does is to assist both learners with and without learning disabilities to know what will be done in the day or the day's activity. And this is an example of visual schedule. We have today, let's say today is Monday, and we have the subjects to be learned, math, literacy, and then science. And with this, we have symbols to represent the subject so that those who can interpret the written words can use the symbols to interpret what will be done in the course of the day. And just after that, we move on to the next thing, which is multiple means of representation. With multiple means of representation, we start by singing a song in relation to the subject to be taught. For instance, if I'm going to teach numeracy, like we saw on the visual schedule, I start with a song like, I'm counting 1, what is 1? 1 is 1 alone is that. I'm counting 2, what is 2? 2 pair, compare, let us pair. 1 is 1 alone is that. So just after the song, then we now introduce the main topic for the subject. And let's say we are teaching something like normal line. With normal line, because I have different kind of learners in my classes, there are different styles of learning. I have to address so many styles or teaching skills so that each and every learner's needs will be met. So I can implement the use of cutouts, bottle toss, normal line draw on the chalkboard boldly. It can even be drawn on the ground so that they play with it. And then we have learners who can write very well. So they can use pencil and then the jotter to do the normal line with. Then with this, I have a very large class, like I said. So I normally base my teaching in group work. With the group work, I have hello, teaching in group work. With the group work, I have activities that are done under the group work, and then some of them are the think session and then send and talk. So when I pose a question with the think session, the individual thinks about the question that I pose, and then after thinking, the person they pair with each other and then share their thoughts. And then the send and talk, the same way when the question is posed, you send to your elbow partner or the person in your opposite direction and then talk to the person about what he or she knows about the topic or the question being asked. In the same way, with the learning, the small grouping. I assign leaders to every group. And with the leaders there, they help learners who are struggling. Even when it comes to distribution of items, those people go there and they pick their items for the rest of the group members. And most of the time, what I do is I tell the leaders that every learner is supposed to know what I'm teaching by the close of the day. So they have to support them in whatever ways they can, which is helping the class so much. And then after that, we have what we call multiple means of action and expression. With multiple means of action and expression, we said learners have different styles of learning. So you don't have to give all of them the same task to do. So I give them questions, and then some come with their answers orally. Others bring their answers in the form of written. Others also use items to represent their answers. And then those who can draw, they also draw to show their response to the questions they ask. And with all these things done in the class, it makes the class so lively. It makes the class so beautiful because they come with so many learning materials or learning resources. And this helps the class. Other learners come to learn. And then with this, even without the teacher, they are learning on their own, which is very helpful to the learners and then the teacher as well. Thank you very much.
So sorry if that was hard to hear. We can try to center on the video as well, but that's all from us. Thank you for your participation.
All right, so next we have, we're gonna hear from the team at World Learning, who is gonna tell us about their work at SEL and UDL and math in Lebanon.
All right, thank you. Hello, everyone. So my colleague Rola and I will be talking about the work we're doing under Kitabi in Lebanon, integrating SEL and UDL in math. So next slide, please. So just to give you an overview on the Kitabi project, it's the objective of the project is to improve performance in reading and writing and math for students in grades 1 through 6, using the holistic learning approach that includes the 3 pillars of connectedness, inclusion, and social and emotional learning. The work is led by World Learning here in Lebanon, and we work with our partners Ana Akra, ALLC, MSI, and IRC. And these are the 3 outcomes under Kitabi. Like I mentioned, they improve student performance in reading in Arabic, English, French, and math, improved social and emotional learning, and improved national service level service delivery of education. Next slide, please. This visual is basically to give you an idea of the increasingly deteriorating situation that we have been experiencing in Lebanon that has had implications on all levels, but specifically within the education sector, starting from 2019 with the political unrest, then the August 2020 Beirut blast, and to present day with the economic situation deteriorating that has led to the scarcity of basic needs, basically. Next slide, please. I will give it over to my colleague Rola now.
Hi. The transition to online learning was a challenge in general, let alone for math, since in Lebanon, math was always being taught through the traditional modes of teaching. I'm talking about mainly public schools at the elementary level. As for the condensed curriculum, a lot of concepts had to be covered for the online learning within a year based on what CRDP requested, based on the textbook and not on the actual math learning objectives. Next, please. In addition to the challenges mentioned, we also had to consider preconceived notions on math. So when people ask me what do I do, and I say I teach math, so the reaction would be, oh, you must be smart. We thought about the different factors that impact math learning and the mindset of math teaching, like math is for geniuses, if you're good, you're smart, gender stereotypes, traditional approach to math teaching and learning, and meaning of math teaching and meaningful learning in Lebanon. Those factors might be common in other parts of the world as well. Next, please. To go back to Kitabi 2, it's basically building on the ministry's reform initiative. And one of the primary initiatives is the curriculum reform. So what we did as a start for math, we mapped the math curriculum from grades 1 to 6 based on math practices, taking into consideration the developmental progression of the child, considering the PYP, the GPF, studying different curricula, French, English, American, British, because we have a varied context in Lebanon. We use the curriculum mapping exercise as a guide to help us develop online contextualized resources that could be used by our target audience, mainly teachers, students, parents. We considered the trilingual instructional language context. We used very simple French and English instructional language to help teachers deliver the lesson using correct mathematical language and strategies. Our guide for content development is based on Kitabi 2 HLA or holistic learning approach. The Q2 has 3 main pillars: UDL, inclusion, connectedness, and SEL. As it relates to math, we worked on relaying concept through multiple means of representations, teacher-student relations, safe environment in which all children are included and have a right to learn. Also relating math learning to children's daily experiences, connecting the different concepts to each other within different math domains and to other subjects like science, geography, arts, etc. And of course, we try to integrate social and emotional learning into both the pedagogical approach and the content of the lessons. By adapting the BMA or the balanced math approach to develop or author the basic math concepts e-lessons, we made sure it caters to the needs of different learning and teaching styles at different levels of students within the 3 pillars of HLA. To you, Karine.
All right, and then since one of the major pillars of the holistic learning approach is social and emotional learning, and one of the major components under Kitabi 2 is social and emotional learning, I wanted to just give you an overview of the SEL work being done in Lebanon. So World Learning has been working very closely with the Ministry of Education and the Center for Educational Research and Development on developing an SEL framework, which was actually, amidst all the chaos in Lebanon, endorsed by the minister very recently. So in Lebanon now we do have a social and emotional learning framework that's contextualized to Lebanon. Within this work, of course, we had the Lebanese University working with Lebanese University, NYU Global Ties, and Harvard University as well. Next slide, please. To give you a sense of some of the competencies that were identified by the major stakeholders in the work that was being done, these are some of the competencies that you can see highlighted here in blue. So things like values, flexibility, working memory, emotional awareness, respect for the environment, and so forth. But just briefly going through those. Of course, there's a lot more to talk about, but that's not the kind of the, please next slide. The definition of SEL for Lebanon is similar also to what Colin had said, but also specific to Lebanon. It's the learning process through which learners acquire a set of competencies in the cognitive, social, and emotional domains required for success in learning, academics, healthy adaptation, and the development of a value system. So this is where the emphasis is in terms of the definition for SEL in Lebanon. Next slide, please. All right, so just as Rula was mentioning some of the preconceived notions in math, we also had to consider the SEL challenges in the Lebanese context, basically that it's not part of the academic system nor the pedagogical approach. There isn't a unified understanding for SEL. It is not seen as an important part of children's learning. There's this confusion between social and emotional learning and psychosocial support. We also did the exercise of mapping the curriculum for the 4 subjects under Kitabi and for grades 1 through 6, and identified existing SEL objectives, but very randomly placed, not developmentally sequenced within and across subjects. And of course, the biggest challenge to integrate SEL into lessons for the online learning platform. So those were some of the identified challenges that we had to work with. Next slide, please. I wanted to just highlight again the work that being done under Kitabi. Kitabi is ensuring that social and emotional learning is a part of the curriculum as one of the major outcomes within this project. So this little visual here shows the way that the ministry also looks at where social and emotional learning is, which is at the classroom level, the pedagogical teaching content level. So it's the basis. And then when I mentioned that there's the confusion between psychosocial support and SEL, this is really the difference, that SEL is developmental and children acquire skills developmentally over time. Then under different kinds of difficult situations for the child, that's when you do an intervention. So that's where the PSS comes in. And then beyond that, children are referred to more specialized people to support their needs. All right, so to address some of the challenges for the SEL integration into the e-lessons, we identified 2 constructs to work with, which were the cognitive and the emotional. As Urula mentioned, there was a condensed curriculum of a 13-week curriculum that was done. So we had to realign the SEL scope and sequence for the 13-week academic year with these 2 constructs that I mentioned. We also were considering the worst case scenario, which was what might the child's context be, learning context be. So there may be children learning alone with minimal to no support. There may be low resource learning contexts. And also anything that we were integrating could be done in the home, school, outdoors, etc. So we wanted it to be diverse like that. We also focused a lot on the pedagogical approach within the HLA model in the way that the slides were being scripted. And of course, we worked with integration through implicit and explicit SEL activities. All right, over to you.
The way we approach students in a math class is crucial to their learning. The connection between content and pedagogy. You can be a great teacher knowing your subject in an excellent way, but not able to deliver it. So content and pedagogy go hand in hand, of course. And applying SEL construct in math optimizes assimilation of math concepts. We also know that teaching math is based on the CPA approach, moving from the concrete to pictorial to reach the abstract level of math concept. Since we are working online, UDL is also present in the development of the content of the online lessons. This is done through the different means of representations, different strategies, and multiple means of engagement through a variety of activities. Next, please. Colin, can we show some examples? Do we still have time to show some examples?
Yeah, you okay. Absolutely can show a few examples.
Okay, thank you. Now, next, please. Now, this is an example of grade 1 lesson where we started by welcoming them and talking to them. There is a script, of course, and this lesson was delivered through different means of representations. The SEL activity focuses on identifying characteristics of friendships by the way it makes them feel. If you see on the screen, we have the 10 frame representation as a drawing, and we have the equation as the symbolic that could be the abstract for some students. Next slide, please. And here, this is the same lesson delivered through different means of engagement, such as building a 10 frame out of simple materials that can be found at home and supporting the child using minimal resources. This is an activity addressed to the student. The conclusion also shows a small SEL exercise that gives the child the opportunity to reflect on their emotions after having completed the math lesson. Okay, next slide, please. Also in the same lesson, we're using the number line to make a 10. So if you notice, we're targeting all kinds of students. So those who cannot understand in a certain way of representation, they have another mean of representation. Showing the student yet another strategy to make a 10. Next, we have an explicit SEL activity for grade 3. Garin can talk more about it.
Sure. So the difference between the implicit and the explicit was with the implicit, we tried to embed it, and it comes very naturally with the math, actually. So you can relate it very much to the actual math concepts that are being taught. But we also had the explicit SEL integration that is more the skill-based kind of what is it that we're trying to target in terms of objectives within the social and emotional learning. So we also put unrelated SEL activities targeting that particular construct. So this is the one that Rola was saying, that it targets the emotional construct and the emotional aspect within friendships. All right, here's another example for a grade 1 for a first grader, and this focuses on attention. So basically the hungry panda needs to eat a certain number of bamboo shoots, and the child needs to be able to know when they reach number 5. So here is another example of another kind of an implicit SEL activity within the math concept learning. Yeah, it's okay. You don't need to play it. He just picks the bamboo. Yeah, look, he's really charming, actually. He eats the bamboo shoots, and so that's another way of engaging the children actually through the animation. Next slide, please. And here's another one as well on attention. So the teacher would be saying the numbers 1 to 20, and the child needs to be able to put these numbers in order without getting distracted. Okay, next slide, please. And just to conclude, of course, I mean, we're talking about all this in a very short period of time, but given the context, and I forgot to mention within the time context that I gave you at the very beginning, COVID also was a big factor in doing the immediate transition to the online learning. So this is a long time's worth of work in a couple of slides, but some of the key takeaways for this was the way that we were designing the lessons and making sure that the delivery is also targeting developmentally and age-appropriate and developmentally appropriate objectives within the subject and the social and emotional learning objectives as well. As Rula mentioned, within the context of UDL, there was a focus on inclusive instruction to maximize performance and ensure engagement. We focused a lot on the sound pedagogical approaches, again, in the way that the slides were scripted, and of course, looking at the effective SEL practices that were included in the design, and again, in the scripted text through both the implicit and the explicit activities. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much, and particularly for those specific examples. So now I'm going to, before we get to our questions, and a reminder, as questions come up, even if they're general or specific to a speaker, please go ahead and drop those in the chat. But I'm going to turn over to the team from FHI 360 to talk about integrating SEL into pre-service teaching, teacher education in Guatemala.
Thank you, Colin. Good morning, everyone. My name is Fernanda Soares. I work as a technical advisor for the Research and Evaluation Department with FHI 360. And today I'll be presenting on a pilot program we implemented in Guatemala, which integrated social and emotional learning into pre-service education for mathematics teachers. I will also highlight some key lessons that we learned from a formative study I conducted with my colleague Alejandro de Freitas, who unfortunately was not able to be with us this morning. Next, please. The pilot was implemented by ADVANCE, which is a regional program funded by USAID, focused on strengthening technical post-secondary degree programs so that more young people, especially those from disadvantaged populations, obtain new and better employment. The ADVANCE program is implemented in Honduras, Guatemala, Jamaica, and most recently in the Dominican Republic. The program has a basic education component, and under its basic education approach, it collaborates with pre-service higher education teacher preparation programs to infuse social and emotional learning, positive youth development, and career readiness into pre-service education. Next, please. In Guatemala specifically, we worked closely with the School of Secondary Teachers at the University of San Carlos to collaboratively design and implement this pilot program, which integrated social and emotional learning into the pre-service practicum course curriculum. Through the pilot, we worked with 19 pre-service secondary math teachers who are in the final year of their teaching degree program and who were enrolled in the practicum course. The 19 pre-service teachers, they first participated in 2 introductory workshops, which focus on setting the foundations for SEL and well-being. And after the workshops, the pre-service teachers attended 16 weekly practicum course lessons, which were part of their regular academic semester. Also, throughout their academic semester, the teachers had weekly classroom practice at local secondary schools where they had the opportunity to teach students and to deliver SEL as part of their math instruction. They were also observed and they received one-on-one coaching sessions. Next, please. Thank you. The curriculum for this SEL-based practicum course was structured around 3 core pillars. The first pillar focused on building pre-service teachers' social and emotional competencies and well-being. This pillar recognizes that teacher well-being and SEL is important as an end goal in and of itself, but it also reflects the idea that the teachers must themselves first possess social and emotional competencies in order to be able to model and foster these social and emotional skills in their students, as Collins was mentioning at the beginning of this panel. The second pillar focused on helping teachers create safe, inclusive, and supportive learning environments, which are environments where the students feel safe, they feel cared for, they feel like they belong, they feel like they matter, environments where they can learn and where they can thrive. And finally, our third pillar focused on purposefully integrating SEL into the mathematics class. Next, please. But how exactly did we promote this integration of SEL into mathematics? So we worked with teachers on 3 specific approaches. So the first approach refers to just general teaching practices, such as modeling social and emotional skills throughout the lesson and using social and emotional language with the students. And this approach connects directly with our first pillar for the curriculum, which focuses on building teachers' social and emotional competencies, as we can't expect teachers to model those skills in the classroom if they don't have them. The second approach promoted freestanding short activities, which are activities that ranged anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes in duration, and that could be implemented by the teacher at any point during the lesson, at the beginning, at the middle, or at the end. And to support teachers in implementing these activities, we designed an activity bank where each activity explicitly and purposefully connected and promoted one or more SEL competency from the SEL framework, which is the framework that we adopted. And just as a reminder, as I believe most of us are familiar with the SEL framework focuses on 4 on 5 key competencies: self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. We also worked with the teachers on how to adapt, sorry, previous slide, please. Thank you. We also worked with the teachers on how to adapt these activities from the activity bank to their local context, as well as on how to create new activities that are grounded in the local culture, as well as, for example, in local games. The third approach focused on the delivery of SEL, woven into the teaching of math core academic content. So we adopted strategies promoted by Joe Bowler from Stanford University on how to teach math for a growth mindset. This included, for example, open math tasks, as well as tasks with multiple correct answers, which provides students the opportunity to struggle and to understand the math content more deeply. So here in this slide is a very simple example just to illustrate what we mean by an open math tasks. So you can ask students how much 2 + 2 equals, or you can revert that and ask what 4 equals, which opens the door for several possible answers, for creativity, and for overall deeper thinking. And then we also worked with the teachers on how to build upon these open math tasks to integrate 3 specific teaching strategies for promotion of SEL in the classroom. So the first strategy is academic discussion, where the teachers promote, or they motivate and they create opportunities for students to explain their thinking and to build on their classmates' thinking. Many students, they can reach an answer in a math task, but can they really explain their thinking process to their classmates? The second approach was cooperative learning, which, as we all know, involves much more than simply putting students together and instructing them to work together, putting them in groups and instructing them to work together. So under this strategy, we worked with the teachers on how to purposefully design structures to support students' collaboration and learning in groups, for example, by creating roles and responsibilities. And finally, we workshopped with the teachers how to design and implement fun games around the teaching of math content. Next slide, please. Thank you. Since this was a pilot program, we wanted to learn from it to inform any potential scale up within our partner university, the University of San Carlos, as well as within other universities in Guatemala from the consortium of universities who expressed an interest in the program. So we conducted a formative study based on simple quantitative methods such as pre and post tests, satisfaction and reflection surveys, as well as qualitative methods such as classroom observations, focus group discussions with the pre-service teachers, and key informant interviews with the university staff. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what are some of the key lessons that we learned from this formative study? First, we found that developing pre-service teachers' own social and emotional competencies facilitate SEL inclusion in the classroom. We found that a high percentage of teachers reported that they had improved their social and emotional skills as a result of their participation in their pilot program. And while we cannot draw a direct correlation, we believe this might have been translated into teachers modeling social and emotional skills and promoting SEL activities when we observe them in their practicum classrooms. Second, effective SEL implementation required a shift away from teacher-direct models of instructions to student-centered methods. One of the challenges that we had is that mathematics instructions in Guatemala most often follow a teacher-centered process of learning. And this is problematic because to properly implement and integrate SEL into instruction, a teacher must be comfortable with abandoning the traditional teacher-directed model focused on imparting knowledge where the students are observing that knowledge. So recognizing this challenge, our program adapted to place further emphasis on building pre-service teachers' capabilities on a student-centered approach, which led to some observable changes in teachers' pedagogical didactics away from lecture-driven classes. Third, we need a whole school approach for effective implementation of SEL. This is something that is highly emphasized in the literature and that also became evident in our pilot program, given some of the challenges that the teachers faced in the schools. So for example, a few pre-service teachers experienced resistance from the principals or from other teachers in the schools where they're conducting the practicum who questioned or who just did not fully support the implementation of SEL. In some cases, even secondary school students questioned or doubted the utility of the SEL activities for their own learning experiences. This is evidence of the need for promoting SEL as a school-wide initiative where all adults, children, and adolescents in the school understand the importance of SEL, and teachers and school staff can promote SEL throughout the day in their daily interactions with the students. And finally, ongoing contextualization of SEL approaches to school and classroom realities is key. While we undertook an initial contextualization of our SEL approach and materials, as implementation in the practicum classrooms unfolded, new challenges and new factors emerged at the school level or at the classroom level that impacted the teacher's ability to effectively implement SEL approaches in the classroom. So our program tried to constantly adapt by working very closely with the pre-service teachers to understand and to overcome these challenges through further contextualization of our SEL activities to adjust them to the realities of the schools and the realities of the classrooms where the teachers were practicing. Thank you very much for listening and for participating today and for your shared interest in this topic. And I really look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Fernanda, and thank you so much to our great panelists for sharing these amazing projects. And I know it was very edifying for me to, and like I said at the beginning, it was edifying and also very, I don't know, hope-inducing for me to see that there's so much parallel in the way that folks all around the world are thinking about implementing SEL and utilizing UDL as a kind of context-based service, process for students to participate in that happens throughout their experience at school. To start, kind of going off of something that Fernanda talked about right at the end of her presentation, this would be a question kind of for anyone who'd like to jump in, and it relates to one of the broad questions I referenced before the presentations, which is when you experience that pushback, this is a newer thing that's coming in, or I wouldn't say new, but more broadly implemented is a newer phenomenon. SEL, as you all know, and UDL have been around a while, but in terms of its broad implementation, and you definitely see that sort of pushback, or even more subtly just resistance, or not seeing the purpose, or not seeing the worth of it because it wasn't part of it's very rarely part of the traditional pedagogy for a specific culture to honor that. So I'm curious from Fernanda or anyone else on the panel, if you could give some examples how you approach, a person or a group who might be not sold on the idea of SEL, might not think of it's important. What are some of the ways you kind of engage that person in conversation to, I don't know, try and get them to see it a different way?
So I think in our case, one of the things that we realized working with the pre-service teachers is that before any introduction in terms of before incorporating those SEL activities in the classroom, it was important for the teachers to first work with the students in introducing SEL to the students, explaining what is SEL, explaining why is SEL important, explaining how SEL can help them in their own learning process. And that in itself reduced a little bit some of the resistance that they were facing with the students. I think working with the principals and working with the other teachers, that was a little bit more of a challenge because within the scope of our program, we were just working with the pre-service teachers. But I think one of the things that became clear is that any program similar to that in the future should adopt a more purposeful approach to incorporate the principals, to incorporate the other teachers in the school, to explain to them what is SEL, why is this teacher is implementing SEL. So just overall, I think this awareness raising, both with the school staff as well as with the students would go a long way. And I think another thing in our case that would be important is that our teachers were working with secondary school students. They were coming from a tradition of very lecture-driven pedagogical approaches. So I think even our pre-service teachers, they emphasized a lot how it would be so important for the students to be learning SEL from the beginning, from like primary level. So when they got to secondary education, there would be already like a foundation in place as well.
Yeah, the sort of purposeful process, like sort of a change management perspective, because I think that's something educators can definitely empathize with, is just having something tossed into their lap and being told, here, go do this now. This is important now, and without a sort of strategy. So that's really interesting. Anyone else on the panel to that in terms of pushback and how you address that? Haley, please.
I think one of the strategies we've used, which works very well in combination with what Fernanda said, is just finding exceptional teachers who do model really strong practices and using them as leaders in their own communities. So our presenter Winifred is a fantastic example. You know, she has 87 learners and she's found a way to make it inclusive nonetheless, as much as she can. So she can go a long way in modeling that acceptance and that the strong performance for other teachers in a way that those at higher levels of the system may not be as powerful in making that message.
Colin, we have also in Lebanon experienced this, I mean, with the resistance, social and emotional learning, because it's not a part of the approaches in teaching and learning and the academic setting as education setting as a whole. One of the things, like Fernanda mentioned, was raising awareness is very important at the level of teachers, to kind of make them realize that, you know, whenever they give examples of things they're doing in class, that is actually social and emotional learning, but that it has to be done more systematically. One of the things with us in our Lebanon experience also is having developed the national SEL framework, which initially may have been a very foreign concept, but it took 2.5 years of consistency and, you know, relationship building to get that buy-in and continuity from the government, from the ministry entities. So, so it is, I mean, change does take time. So for us, this is a huge achievement. And then of course, that all hopefully trickles down in our, you know, continued efforts to raise awareness on the importance of SEL. And of course, COVID has also, unfortunately, I mean, COVID did kind of create that momentum, if you want, to say that, you know, social and emotional learning is extremely important for children right now. And so there is that added piece to it as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Those different perspectives, because there's, you know, and just to honor what you all were saying too, that every context is different. So in terms of a purposeful approach, it's got, you know, what I'm hearing is it's got to be thought through the environment, not kind of thought about separately and imported in. And that is, you know, that is, it's really great to hear that is kind of a commonality in everyone's work. So there was a comment in the chat about from Uche about just it being sad that even though SEL and UDL is important, sometimes educational systems and countries are politicized, making it impossible for teachers to teach passionately, which I think is definitely true. I think we'd all agree. So, you know, that kind of sparked a question for me. You know, say you have a teacher who is and for this panel, let's say a math teacher who is just really passionate about SEL and really wanting to implement it, but don't really have and as we're saying, there's the best way to do SEL is through some sort of systemic approach, but doesn't really have the support, whether it be there's reticence to jump right into SEL from administration or the district or country that they're in. Or maybe it's just, you know, people don't, you know, around the school just aren't bought in, not in a negative way, but just, you know, aren't there. And so a teacher might be kind of wanting to implement something on their own. What advice might you give a teacher like that, where they might not be in the most supportive environment to implement SEL, but still want to? And that's a question for any of the panelists.
I may answer this, Colin?
Yes, please.
Okay. I've been applying SEL, and I know many teachers who did apply SEL for a long time without naming it as SEL, without having it as a school culture. So it all depends on the teacher, how much she believes in herself and in the way she or he are delivering the instruction, how much they believe or they are willing to make a change in their own classroom. It would be difficult at the beginning, but with persistence and when everybody would see the results, they would all accept and follow the model. And I can give one example here. Lately, we had some induction sessions for some coaches in Lebanon for the math coaches. And the math coaches mainly that came to attend this induction session on Kitabi 2 approach and integrating SEL were men in the late old man, and they were secondary teachers used to give traditional math and all that stuff. So if you can see them, the way they entered the conference room, in which attitude and the way they left the room, now they are advocating for the SEL and they are advocating for the HLA and the Kitabi 2 approaches, because they were very happy to see how the SEL was integrated in the math instruction in a very smooth and nice way without complicating their lives. Garine was with me when we were implementing the session, and she can tell you more about it if she'd like to. So what the message that I want to do, everything is difficult, but when you really believe in it and you can do it and be a good example, everybody will follow.
Great. Any other thoughts on that from the panelists? You know, what you would say, or for a teacher who's might not be in the most supportive environment, but still wants to do SEL?
I think one of the things that we were also trying to do in the Lebanese context, and that was mentioned in the presentation, is that we always consider doing SEL not as something that requires a lot of resources and materials, etc. So that's something where, you know, it can be done in many different contexts. It's not necessarily to be done in the classroom. And this was also kind of a novel idea. You know, social and emotional learning has to be done in the classroom. But when you think about in working within the holistic learning approach under Kitabi, we also wanted to make sure that SEL is being integrated as a part of the child's life, not as something that's just done in the classroom for a specific thing. So making those connections,
Thank you. Thank you for that. That's some really great points. And there's a great comment just now in the chat, speaking specifically of the context in Lebanon, but pointing out that one way that buy-in got built was by having the by seeing adults identify that they need support with those skills. And I think that's a really great, you know, thought in terms of the connection, in terms of getting SEL to students, as we've been talking about, is through the adults, through the teachers. But that also is a way to build buy-in. You know, it's always easier to buy into something when you see it benefiting yourself. So thank you for that comment. So here's a question for all the panelists, coming from Kara. You know, kind of still talking about these different stakeholders that might need to be convinced. You know, Rula, you were just talking about, you know, having, you know, when you show that it works, then people will buy in. And obviously the way you show them something works is by demonstrating it, whether through data, whether through having people actually see it, but then also just through discussion and kind of showing the kind of reticent person why it's important. So the question is, are there any particular arguments or experiences that you all could share that you found where you were particularly effective in convincing someone who might be a little resistant to SEL?
I can start on that, Colin. So I think at a higher level, there's a lot of scientific evidence these days showing the benefits of SEL for long-term life outcomes. So the benefits of learning SEL early on and how that may impact your career, your future careers, your health, education. So there's a lot of rigorous body of scientific evidence in there that can be presented to the stakeholders. But I also think it's important that we start thinking about SEL not just as a medium to reach some of these long-term goals, but also in reflecting and thinking about the role of education to promote the holistic development of the students, going just beyond the academic skills, and how education can promote this holistic development through the incorporation of social and emotional learning approach. I would say more at the individual level as well, and going back to one of the comments in the chat, which I agree, it's like a great comment. One of the things that we noticed working with the teachers, we introduced, for example, a lot of mindfulness strategies to them to support them in managing their stress levels, in promoting self-awareness, in promoting self-regulation. And when we introduced mindfulness, we also showed to them like the scientific evidence around the benefits of mindfulness. And I remember very distinctively, like one of the comments from one teacher was, why no one ever introduced this to us before if this is so great? So I think, you know, coming from a research background, I think to me, always sort of like also showing the rigorous scientific evidence that sort of like backs the benefits of some of those things has a role in generating buy-in and generating support.
Yeah, pointing to the evidence is always, you know, sometimes people still look at the evidence and decide they don't want to ignore it, but it gets harder and harder when you really put down that hard and so much the large body of work that's been done. And then also I wanted specifically as well, this question, not to leave UDL out, Haley, if there's, you know, in terms of, I didn't mean to frame it just as SEL, but if UDL, you know, any sort of experience of convincing someone who might be hesitant to it. So if any other of the panelists have an experience, Haley, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think, again, as Fernanda said, there's a rigorous evidence base for the utility of UDL as well, in that it can be supportive of learner achievement in a diverse variety of settings. I think the other argument for UDL and perhaps also SEL is that you're not necessarily changing the curriculum. You don't have to start over. You don't have to make a new textbook. You just use these approaches to make learning more engaging and relevant for children. So it's not something additional that you have to change about your life. You just have to build it in and embed it into existing methodologies.
Yeah, build it in, and I always like to think build on top of what's already being done. And that I think is so key, because initiative burnout in education is very prevalent. You know, it's this new thing, it's that new thing, now this is the buzzword. And that's something we talk a lot about at Castle with SEL, is kind of making sure it's beyond the buzzword, and it's really thinking thoughtfully about what it actually means in your context.
I would just add to that, it's showing the message that it's not like a neither or thing. It's when you're talking about SEL and academic content, just trying to demystify this distinction about them being like two separate siloed things.
I wonder if I could jump in, Fernanda, I had a question. I think you mentioned that there were some moments when even students had some resistance to some of the activities. So I would guess that maybe the evidence base isn't as powerful with them, and that you would take another. So I wonder if you could say something about, you know, how people addressed the initial student resistance.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we noticed. Like, we worked with the teachers where we had this activity bank, and we thought, okay, well, the teachers are going to have this activity bank and these strategies, and they're going to go to the classroom and, you know, like excited and ready to implement. And then when that happened, in some cases, it wasn't always the case, but with a few teachers, they had that resistance. So that's why, like I was mentioning, we took a step back and we worked with them on designing lesson plans, very participatory lesson plans, where before they introduce any sort of like new activities or new didactics, they worked with this awareness, sort of like awareness raising with the students, because these were secondary education students. So I think the approach might have been a little bit different if we're talking about primary, elementary. So they had these activities with them again, where they just went through, okay, what is SEL? Why am I as a teacher implementing SEL in this classroom? Why am I doing these activities with you? And why is this beneficial to you? Why, like, So kind of like trying to generate their awareness and sort of like buy-in from the students before just jumping into like straight implementation of like SEL activities and so on.
Thank you.
And I, you know, going off of that, I know one thing with older students, you know, in the United States context that CASEL works is as they get older, a lot of times SEL supports and thinking about it is much more geared towards younger students. And so there's sometimes a bit of a, oh, this is sort of hokey or this is not, you know, and so, you know, thinking about, okay, well, what does SEL look like in the lived experience for middle school students or you know, adolescents, and, you know, I think is engaging them in what it means in their lives and their lived experience and having them use their voice, for sure.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Fernanda.
Yeah, no, I was just going to compliment, like, I think in our context, and as in many contexts where we work, so like when these students, when they came to secondary education, they were just used to traditional lessons, and they did not understand that through more participatory, active approaches that seemed like just a game, that just seemed like play, that they were also learning. So they kind of had this distinction in the mind a little bit too, like between learning and play. So like if they're playing, they're not necessarily learning. And that's what we had to demystify a little bit.
Yeah, and actually to follow, that was a question I had because this came up in all three of the presentations, was this idea of play and games and using that as a, you know, that being a strategy for bringing SEL into the classroom. So I'm wondering if any of the panelists could maybe speak on that a little more of what the connection and how you all see the connection of play and games and sort of more, you know, less structured, less traditionally structured lesson time and SEL.
May I? Yes.
Please.
Okay. We were delivering sessions, we said, and some training, and the SEL team were preparing an activity just to help the focus, to pay attention, to listen to instruction. It was like a game to stand in line from the shortest to the longest, then according to their month of birth or according to the week or the day or things like that. Directly, I asked the teacher to connect these with the math concepts and to make use of this game in their math teaching. So it would be SEL and math at the same time, the attention, and make advantage of these games in the math class so that the students will be learning about increasing, decreasing order, the days of the week, the months of the year, in a very nice, natural way as a game in the classroom without feeling the burden of this. This was a very easy example on the elementary classroom.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I agree with Uche. Brilliant strategy. A question just came. Oh, Haley, go ahead, please.
I was actually going to see, I'm not sure if Winifred, if you're there, but I'd love to hear Winifred's perspective on the use of games in the classroom. I'm not sure, Winifred, if you're able to unmute to tell us about how you use games to support learners in your classroom. Give it like 5 seconds, otherwise.
Hailey, you're asking me, I lost you. Can you repeat? I lost connection for
sorry.
a few seconds.
Yeah, I was trying to see if my colleague Winifred in Ghana might be able to unmute to tell us about the use of games.
Okay,
but,
sorry.
I'm not sure if that'll work. So I'm sure we can keep going. Thanks.
Absolutely, yeah, and definitely please share the video of Winifred so folks can review that as well. A question did come in. This is specifically for Gareen, but for anyone actually. But the question is that there's the point about the difference between SEL and PSS being very important. The SEL is more preventative and developmental, and PSS is intervention based. So the question is, how much should we be emphasizing the difference so that people see the value of building strong foundations through SEL for students and teachers, especially since SEL has also been touted in crisis settings as an intervention. What are our thoughts on these? And if someone could actually please give a quick working definition of PSS, that's a term I'm unfamiliar with, that would be terrific.
Yes, so the social and emotional learning and the psychosocial support, the question about whether or not or how much should it be emphasized, at least here in the Lebanese context, psychosocial support or PSS is more typically used, and at some point was being used interchangeably, so as if it doesn't, there is no difference between the two. So in one of the slides, I was showing you the ministry's vision and how also under Kitabi we are approaching social and emotional learning. That social and emotional learning is not something, I think Fernando was mentioning that as well, it's not something that's temporary, short-term, activity-based. It's not outside of the learning learning environment or the learning experiences or that school environment of the child. It's a part of it, just like you have math and you have geography and history, etc. Social and emotional learning is a part of a foundational part actually of children's skill development to be able to perform well in academics, let's say. And obviously there is overlap in terms of the different domains across psychosocial support and SEL. However, the way that it's been distinguished is that one is more, that's what has to be inside the classrooms and the, like I was saying earlier, the pedagogical approach, whereas PSS, again, it's more a short-term intervention based on the needs. And it's almost as if when we say PSS, it's like we're in a chronic state of intervention, as if, here in Lebanon. But this is what we're trying to do right now. So social and emotional learning is quite new in this context, and it is very important to emphasize the difference between the two, as we have been trying to do in Lebanon. I don't know, Alyssa, if that addresses your question.
Yes,
I think
it's great. I think I just put a note in the chat that I think that's not often understood a lot. So appreciate that clarification. I think we do need to understand the difference. Thanks.
Yeah, I think when as you were saying, Gareen, when you have that deficit-based perspective towards child development, where these are skills that are missing that need to be given to the students, that's where you get just kind of the reinforcement of inequitable structures. Certain students need this, whereas other students might not. And it's not a skill that just needs to be learned. It's a logic that needs to be grown from within. That's truly for everyone. Uche, I see you came off on camera. Did you have a question? No, just coming off camera. Well, and we have about 13 minutes left, so I want to give just a moment of wait time to see if there's any further questions from the audience who, either in the chat or come off mute and feel free to ask. And then I'll give a moment of wait time, and then if not, we'll kind of wrap up with a question or two more. So any additional questions for our panelists from the audience? Uche, please.
Yeah, thank you. Basically, it's not a question, but like I made a reference earlier on saying in some countries, the use of SEL or UDL is hard because of the politics and what have you. So, and someone made the point that you mustn't really call it SEL or things like that. So basically, I think if I'm being honest, during my time in primary school and secondary school, I think the SEL was also used, kind of, but not called SEL or UDL. And my mom being a teacher, I do help her with lesson notes and things like that. And from the things that are there, you see how much of arousing interest they have to put in just to make sure that they have the attention of the children. So I believe basically that once a teacher is committed and really have passion for the integration of SEL, UDL, PSS, it will just flow. Like, it's not something that will be a challenge or, you know, you just have to find a way to maneuver it and it will all be good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then there was a question just to, for point of clarification for either Gareen maybe or anyone else, but that SEL is more classroom and PSS is more for general support. Is that the gist of your point, or is it something different?
So SEL, in terms of whether or not it's more for classroom, the idea basically is that it's part of the child's development. These are skills that the child is going to acquire over time, and it has to be meaningfully and purposefully incorporated into the curriculum. So when we're talking about earlier, when I was saying that we did a mapping of the SEL objectives across these subjects, we did see some SEL objectives in there, but they were not sequenced developmentally. They were just kind of randomly put there. So, and I think there is a common, I mean, everybody mentioned that there has to be a meaningful incorporation of the SEL objectives over the child's, you know, development. And as for PSS, like I said, I mean, it's more general support, as in, I mean, the context is different. You can focus on specific areas. If you want to focus, let's say, on the emotional construct, for example, the PSS activities that are done could also be, I mean, depending on where you are as well. I mean, PSS activities also can be done in the classrooms. That's why I didn't want to say that, you know, SEL is for classroom and PSS is for more general support. I mean, that could also be done in the class, but it's the way that SEL is integrated and how PSS is used. Hopefully that addresses your question, Saron.
Great, thank you for the, great, thank you for the clarification. So a few minutes left, a few more questions coming in. So there was a question maybe about some more examples of the kind of games that impact SEL. What is it about, you know, and I think to extend on it, what is about certain games, you know, that they're playing? You know, a game could also be sitting independently playing solitaire, you know, or playing cards by yourself, which wouldn't be that much SEL practice. So what are the features of kind of some of the games that you all feel really support SEL development? Fernanda, go ahead. And then Uche, I see you have a follow-up as well.
Yeah, I would say, like, in our case, there are not specifically like one type of game. Like, we really just worked with the teachers to support them in workshopping, in developing those games with math content infused into it. So we really just try to work with them, you know, to identify, okay, what are some of the social emotional, what's your learning goal for this lesson in terms of the mathematics content, and what are some of the specific social and emotional skills that you think you can promote integrated with this learning goal, and then sort of like workshop with them. Okay, so what are some of the strategies, what are some of the games that you can develop that promote this integration, but at the same time is potentially, for example, promoting communications between the students, this promoting relationships between the students, where the students have to communicate with one another, where they have to potentially work together, or like working in groups in order to achieve one product, in order to achieve one goal, or where they even like have to, after they do the game or during the game, that they need to explain their thinking process. Okay, how did they reach that? What were they thinking as they were playing that game, and sort of like try to explain that back to their classmates. And then, like, honestly, like, so many types of games emerged from that, from the teachers themselves. So I think it's just kind of like trying to think more purposefully, okay, how can I promote those specific SEL skills? And I think with games, it's easier to promote the more like interpersonal skills as well. How can you infuse that into the teaching of this math content specifically?
That's I think very well said. I love that idea that it gives the opportunity for students that interpersonal, that interacting with one another. You know, I think of there's an American scholar named John Huizinga who talks about play as being within a magic circle where, you know, children, when you're playing, you know, the rules are different, you know, you get to sort of be in a bit of a sandbox where, you know, you can interact with others in different ways. And I think in that interaction, that's where a lot of SEL lies. Uche, I think you had a comment, and then I have one more question that close us out.
Yeah, I think Ms. Suarez was in my head because I think everything she said was exactly how I meant to put it. You know, like once you're a teacher, you don't need to be told these games or something like that. You just walk into the classroom, you know the vibe, energy. So you just come up with something. You understand? Well, yeah. There's no manual for you to read to understand the games to play. So you just go on with the flow. Yeah, thank you.
It's not an out of the box, you know, SEL or UDL is not an out of the box thing. It is a built, you know, there's resources that come out of boxes that can help you build that. But it definitely still needs to be kind of homegrown. And then I've got one more question I think we'll have time for is from Saram at RTI International. And I think this is could be specifically directed at Haley, but about how SEL is included in the UDL process, or, you know, even more generally, Haley, how you frame sort of the relationship between SEL and UDL, because I definitely want to not leave just thinking those two terms are interchangeable. They're clearly interrelated, but not the exact same. So I'd love for you to speak a little on that.
Sure, and I'll welcome my SEL colleagues to add to my answer, but the way that I articulate it is that they are two distinct concepts, of course, but there's a lot of commonalities between the two, particularly in the support to learners who have diverse needs for very different reasons. So UDL, as we know, supports learners with possible disabilities, but it also supports learners who may struggle to learn for a variety of reasons, including psychosocial trauma, including abuse at home, including hunger and poverty. So UDL is a framework that helps us to understand that there are diverse ways that children need to learn and to express themselves. I think SEL has a lot in common because it's trying to reach children through ways that they learn best and making a connection. So one of the UDL principles is multiple means of engagement. And I think engagement is a real core principle of SEL as well. So I see them being very complementary, but I wouldn't say that one is inside of the other or the other way around, but that they are very good concepts to work together. I don't know if others have further thoughts on the matter.
Yeah, more of a Venn diagram than a nested model, for sure. I think that was very nicely said. So we have about 3 minutes left, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. And I just want to say thank you first to SID-W for putting on this great panel. Also want to say thank you to our amazing panelists. It's been a pleasure getting to know you all in planning for this and getting to facilitate this conversation. And I'll turn it over to Kara for any closing thoughts.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for your participation and really wonderful presentations and insights. And to the audience as well, really glad to have you here and for your questions and comments. As has been mentioned just now, they put in the chat a link to the survey. So we would really appreciate if everyone would give us feedback on the event. Our working group, Education for Development, has ongoing events on a variety of topics. And so if you have suggestions or you want to become involved, definitely reach out to either me or my co-chair, Elisa Phillips. You can find our information on the event webpage. And you might want to, before you hang up, look a little bit. A couple of links were shared. For example, the Kitabi 2 YouTube channel that has, some activities. And then the last thing I wanted to say was that also on the SID-W website in about a week or so, the recording of this event will be available too. So thank you, everybody. Fill out the survey and hope to see you at another event soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thank you very
everyone.
much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Good night from Cambodia. It's been very, very great and very helpful. Thank you for organizing this kind of webinar. Thank you very much.